"You're not on the list," Robert Whitfield said loud enough for everyone inside the glass-walled conference room to hear, his voice cutting through the quiet hum of early morning conversations like a blade. And just like that, the entire hallway outside conference room fell silent as heads turned one by one toward the tall black man standing calmly at the entrance, dressed in a simple navy blazer, crisp white shirt, and dark jeans that looked more practical than impressive, the kind of outfit that didn't scream executive but carried something else entirely, something quieter, something steadier, something that made people look twice even if they couldn't explain why. But Robert Whitfield wasn't looking twice. He had already decided, already judged, already dismissed, and he stepped slightly into the doorway, blocking the entrance with a posture that felt more territorial than procedural. "This is a closed executive meeting," he continued, holding a tablet in his left hand as if it were a badge of authority. "Investors and board members only." And the black man didn't respond immediately. He simply glanced past Robert into the room, where polished mahogany tables reflected the morning sunlight, where senior executives adjusted their ties and shuffled printed reports, where a $300 million acquisition was about to be finalized, and still he didn't move, didn't argue, didn't raise his voice. He just stood there with the same calm expression, like someone watching a moment unfold that he had already seen before. Robert frowned slightly, mistaking silence for hesitation. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to step aside," he added, his tone tightening, and a few people inside the room leaned back in their chairs, curiosity replacing indifference as they watched the exchange through the glass walls. Whispers started low, barely audible. "Who is that?" someone murmured. "Probably wrong floor," another replied, and near the far end of the hallway, Ryan Lopez, a junior analyst barely 6 months into his role, glanced up from his laptop perched on a rolling cart, his eyes narrowing slightly as he studied the man at the door. Something about him felt familiar, not recognizable exactly, but familiar in the way certain names lingered in presentations or floated in emails that only senior leadership usually saw. Meanwhile, Robert shifted his stance again, clearly uncomfortable with the growing audience. "You'll need to wait outside," he insisted, gesturing toward the seating area across the hallway. But the man finally spoke, his voice calm, measured, and low enough that people leaned forward just to catch it. "This is the investor briefing, correct?" Robert nodded curtly. "Yes, and like I said, this meeting is restricted." The man glanced once more inside the room, his eyes settling briefly on the large screen displaying the company's logo alongside the word Strategic Partnership Proposal. Then he returned his gaze to Robert, still composed, still unbothered, and for a brief second, Robert hesitated. Something about the man's confidence made him pause, but the hesitation passed quickly, replaced by certainty. "I'm going to need you to step back now," Robert said again, firmer this time, and as the door behind him opened slightly, revealing more executives arriving, the hallway grew even quieter, the tension subtle but unmistakable, and still, the man didn't move, didn't argue, didn't defend himself. He simply adjusted his sleeve, glanced at his watch, and waited, as if time itself were about to prove something no one else in that hallway yet understood. Robert Whitfield folded his arms slightly, convinced the moment was already settled, but the man standing in front of him did not step away. He simply nodded once, as if acknowledging a detail that only he understood, then shifted his weight calmly and looked down the hallway where framed company milestones lined the wall, photographs of ribbon cuttings, acquisitions, and leadership summits stretching back nearly 20 years. His eyes paused briefly on a photo from 3 years earlier showing executives shaking hands beneath a banner announcing a major expansion, and though no one else noticed, Ryan Lopez leaned forward a little more, his curiosity growing as he studied the man's expression, because there was no frustration, no embarrassment, no urgency, just quiet patience, the kind of patience that felt deliberate. Robert cleared his throat again, clearly uncomfortable with the growing silence. "Sir, I really need you to step aside," he repeated, but the man glanced at his watch. Again, a simple stainless steel piece without a recognizable brand, then looked back toward the glass door. Inside the room, executives began settling into their seats, folders opened, laptops powered on, and the large digital clock on the wall ticked closer to 9 o'clock, the scheduled start time for the investor briefing. One of the senior directors inside whispered something to another executive while glancing toward the hallway, the quiet tension spreading like a ripple through the space. Robert shifted again, lowering his voice slightly. "If you are here for another meeting, I can help you find it," he said, attempting a more controlled tone, but the man simply replied, "I am exactly where I need to be," and the calm certainty in his voice made Robert pause for a fraction of a second before dismissing it. Ryan Lopez felt a faint jolt of recognition at the words. Something about the tone sounded familiar, like lines he had heard in recorded investor calls played during orientation, but he could not place it. Inside the conference room, Michael Harrington, the company's chief executive officer, adjusted his glasses while reviewing the printed agenda, unaware of the exchange unfolding just beyond the glass. The first slide on the presentation screen displayed the word Strategic Growth Initiative with a subheading referencing the pending $300 million partnership. And several executives leaned forward with anticipation. This deal represented the company's biggest expansion in nearly a decade. Meanwhile, the man outside the door remained still, hands relaxed at his sides, his posture calm but grounded, as if he had all the time in the world. Robert exhaled quietly, clearly growing impatient. "The meeting is about to begin," he said, "so I am going to ask you one last time to step away." But before the man could respond, Ryan Lopez spoke cautiously from behind his cart. "Robert, maybe we should check the updated list." His voice careful, respectful, but uncertain. Robert turned sharply. "The list has not changed," he replied, and Ryan nodded slowly, though his eyes returned to the man at the door, still searching his memory, still trying to understand why the calm presence in the hallway felt so significant. And as the clock clicked to 9 o'clock, the door behind Robert opened wider, signaling the official start of the meeting, yet the man did not move. He simply looked past Robert once more, as if waiting for something that had not arrived yet, but was already on its way. Robert Whitfield stepped slightly forward, lowering his voice but tightening his tone as the hallway filled with more employees passing by on their way to morning briefings. The attention was no longer subtle. It was visible, and the man standing calmly outside the conference room seemed completely unfazed by it. Robert glanced at his tablet again, as if confirming his authority, then spoke firmly, "Sir, you are delaying an executive meeting." And this time his voice carried enough weight that a few people inside the room looked up from their screens. Ryan Lopez shifted uneasily beside his cart. Sensing the tension building, the man did not respond immediately. He simply nodded once, then stepped slightly to the side, not to leave, but to allow two senior directors to pass through the doorway. His courtesy only seemed to frustrate Robert further, because it did not match the resistance he expected. It felt composed, controlled, deliberate. Robert exhaled slowly, then turned toward the hallway security desk located about 20 feet away. "I might need assistance here," he said quietly, not loud enough to create a scene, but loud enough for Ryan to hear, and Ryan's stomach tightened. He glanced back at the man, wondering why someone so calm would still remain in place. Inside the conference room, Michael Harrington tapped his pen lightly against the table as executives settled into their seats, unaware that the hallway had turned into a silent stage. The large screen now displayed financial projections, numbers climbing across the chart, $300 million highlighted in bold, and outside, Robert returned his attention to the man. "If you do not step away, I will have to escalate this," he said, his posture stiff. The man tilted his head slightly, then replied in the same measured tone, "You should do what you think is necessary," and the calm acceptance in his response only deepened the tension. Ryan glanced again at the man's face. The familiarity grew stronger, like a name just out of reach. Two employees passing by slowed their steps, pretending to check their phones while quietly observing. Robert noticed the growing audience and tightened his grip on the tablet, determined to end the situation quickly. "This meeting involves high-level investors," he added, "and we cannot allow interruptions." The man nodded once again, then glanced through the glass wall at the presentation screen, his expression unchanged. "I understand," he said softly, and the confidence in those two words made Ryan shift again, because it sounded less like acknowledgement and more like certainty. At that moment, the hallway security officer began walking toward them at a steady pace, not urgent, but intentional. Robert noticed and straightened slightly, reassured by the approaching support. Meanwhile, the man remained still, hands relaxed, posture steady. His eyes briefly scanned the hallway, as if measuring time itself. Ryan felt a quiet tension settle in his chest. Something about the entire moment felt larger than a simple misunderstanding. The security officer approached within a few feet, slowing his steps as he assessed the situation, and still, the man standing outside the conference room did not move, did not argue, did not explain. He simply waited, calm as ever, while inside the room. The first slide transitioned to the title Strategic Partnership Authorization, and the clock on the wall continued ticking forward, each second tightening the invisible thread, pulling everything closer to a moment no one in that hallway yet understood. The security officer slowed to a stop a few feet away, his presence quiet but noticeable, and Robert Whitfield straightened slightly, as if the situation had already shifted in his favor. "This gentleman is not authorized for the meeting," Robert said calmly, gesturing toward the man. The officer nodded once, professional and neutral, then turned to the man standing by the door. "Sir, is there something I can help you with?" he asked, his tone polite but structured. The man met his gaze calmly. "I am waiting for the meeting to begin," he replied, and Ryan Lopez felt the same ripple of recognition again. The voice, the composure, something about it felt deliberate, like someone who understood exactly what was unfolding. Robert exhaled quietly, clearly losing patience. "This is an executive session," he repeated. "He is not on the list." The officer glanced briefly at Robert's tablet, then back at the man, and before the conversation could continue, Ryan stepped forward slightly, his voice cautious. "Excuse me, can I just check something?" he said, pulling his laptop closer. Robert turned sharply. "Ryan, that will not be necessary." But Ryan hesitated, fingers hovering over the keyboard, the name lingering in his mind, the calm expression, the familiar tone. He opened the company's internal investor file, scrolling quickly through the morning briefing document, his eyes scanning the list of external partners and advisors. And then he paused, his breath catching slightly as he saw a name highlighted near the bottom of the page. He looked up again at the man by the door, then back down at the screen, then up again. The resemblance clicked into place, not just the face, but the posture, the stillness, the certainty. Ryan swallowed, his voice quieter now. "Robert, I think we should double-check." Robert shook his head firmly. "The list has already been verified." But Ryan did not close the laptop, his heart beating faster as the pieces aligned. Inside the conference room, Michael Harrington leaned forward as the presentation shifted to the next slide, the words "funding authorization" appearing in bold. Executives murmured quietly, unaware that the hallway tension had sharpened. Ryan took a small step forward, still unsure, but compelled by the growing certainty. "Sir," he said carefully, addressing the man, "are you here for the partnership briefing?" The man nodded once, his expression unchanged. "Yes," he replied, and Ryan felt a chill run through his chest, because the name on his screen matched the tone in that single word. Robert's patience thinned further. "Ryan, please step back," he said, but Ryan hesitated, glancing once more at the highlighted name, then at the man standing calmly before them. The security officer watched silently, sensing the shift. The hallway quieted again as two employees slowed nearby, pretending to review emails while listening. Ryan finally spoke, careful but firm. "I think we may be missing something." And the man by the door adjusted his sleeve slightly, glancing once more toward the conference room, calm as ever, while the clock on the wall ticked forward, and the first phase of the meeting officially began without him. Ryan Lopez felt the tension settle heavier in his chest as he stared at the highlighted name on his screen, his fingers hovering just above the keyboard. The hallway seemed quieter now, like the air itself was holding its breath. Robert Whitfield noticed the hesitation and stepped slightly closer, his tone tightening. "Ryan, close that file," he said firmly, but Ryan did not move immediately. His eyes flicked between the laptop and the man standing calmly at the doorway, the realization forming, but not yet spoken. The security officer shifted his weight subtly, sensing the change in tone. Meanwhile, inside the conference room, the presentation advanced again, financial projections climbing upward, the bold number $300 million glowing against the polished screen. Executives leaned forward, voices low and focused, unaware that the most important person connected to that number was still standing outside. Robert exhaled sharply, losing patience. "Sir, I am going to need you to step away from the entrance," he said again, and this time he extended his arm slightly, gesturing toward the seating area across the hallway. The motion was controlled but firm. The man glanced briefly at the gesture, then back toward Robert, his expression unchanged. "The meeting already started," Robert added, as if finalizing the decision. The man nodded once. "Yes, I noticed," he replied calmly, and the quiet confidence in his voice made Ryan's pulse quicken. Because it did not sound like someone excluded, it sounded like someone observing, someone measuring. Robert stepped half a pace forward, determined to end the moment. "You will need to wait elsewhere," he said, and for the first time, the hallway seemed to tilt toward a breaking point. Ryan swallowed, then spoke carefully. "Robert, I really think we should confirm." His voice low but urgent. Robert shook his head again. "There is nothing to confirm." But Ryan turned the laptop slightly so only Robert could see the highlighted names still glowing on the screen. Robert glanced down briefly, then dismissed it. "That is a different department," he said quickly, but Ryan was not convinced. The name, the timing, the investor briefing, everything aligned too precisely to ignore. The man at the door remained still, hands relaxed, posture calm, as if he had seen this moment many times before. And suddenly a memory surfaced in his mind. Years earlier, standing outside a different conference room, dressed in a simple blazer, listening to a manager tell him that investors were already seated, that there was no need for him to attend, that his presence was not required. He had not argued then either. He had simply walked away, but he remembered the silence that followed, the quiet determination that formed in that hallway, the deals he built afterward, the partnerships he secured. The companies that learned too late who he was, and now standing outside another conference room. The same calm settled over him again. Ryan watched him carefully, sensing something deeper beneath the silence. The security officer glanced between them, waiting for direction. Robert finally spoke again, more firmly than before. "Sir, I am asking you to step aside." The man looked at him steadily, then glanced once more through the glass wall where executives now discussed funding structures. His expression calm but focused, and then he spoke softly. "I can wait." And the simplicity of those words seemed to echo louder than anything else, because it sounded less like patience and more like certainty, as if he knew something no one else in that hallway had realized yet. And as the clock moved forward, the invisible tension tightened, pulling everyone closer to a moment that was about to change everything. The hallway felt tighter now, the quiet no longer neutral but charged. Ryan Lopez kept glancing between his screen and the man standing calmly near the doorway, and Robert Whitfield noticed the hesitation growing, his tone shifting from confident to defensive. "Ryan, this is unnecessary," he said, but Ryan did not respond immediately, his eyes locked on the highlighted name, then drifting back to the man whose calm seemed almost deliberate. Meanwhile, inside the conference room, Michael Harrington leaned forward as one of the senior executives began outlining projected timelines. The words Phase 1 funding appeared on the screen, and the number $300 million remained bold and central. The deal was moving forward without interruption, yet outside, something else was beginning to shift. The man standing at the door reached slowly into his jacket pocket, not hurried, not dramatic, just measured. He pulled out his phone and glanced at the screen briefly, then lifted it to his ear. Ryan noticed the movement instantly. Robert did too. Though he dismissed it as routine, the man spoke quietly, his voice calm and even. "Alicia, it is Darius," he said, and Ryan felt another flicker of recognition. The name landed differently now, like a missing piece sliding into place. "Yes, I am outside conference room B," Darius continued, pausing briefly as he listened, his expression unchanged. "No, they have already started," he added, and Robert shifted slightly, his confidence faltering just enough to show. The security officer remained still, observing. Ryan leaned forward subtly, trying not to appear obvious. "Yes, go ahead and initiate," Darius said calmly, and the simplicity of the words carried a quiet weight. He lowered the phone slowly, slipping it back into his pocket, and then returned his gaze toward the glass wall inside the room. Michael Harrington's tablet buzzed lightly on the table. He glanced down briefly, then ignored it as the presenter continued, but within seconds, another executive checked their phone, then another. The subtle ripple began quietly. Outside, Robert frowned slightly, noticing the shift inside the room but not yet understanding it. Ryan's pulse quickened. The alignment between the call and the sudden movement inside felt too precise to ignore. The security officer glanced toward the conference room, sensing the same change. Inside, Michael Harrington finally reached for his device again, his expression tightening slightly as he read the notification. He glanced up at the presenter, then back down at the screen, and the quiet rhythm of the meeting faltered for the first time. Outside, Darius remained still, hands relaxed, posture steady, as if he had expected this exact moment. Robert cleared his throat, trying to regain control. "Sir, I still need you to move away from the doorway," he said. But his tone no longer carried the same certainty. Darius glanced at him calmly, then back toward the room. "I think they may need a moment," he replied softly. And Ryan felt the shift fully now, because the confidence in that sentence sounded less like speculation and more like knowledge. Inside the conference room, Michael Harrington leaned back slightly, his brow furrowing as he looked toward the glass wall, and for the first time, his eyes drifted toward the hallway, toward the man still standing outside, calm, patient, and completely unmoved, while the clock on the wall continued forward, each second tightening the space between misunderstanding and revelation. Inside the conference room, the quiet ripple turned into visible confusion as Michael Harrington lowered his tablet slowly, his expression tightening while he read the message again. One of the senior executives leaned toward him, whispering something under his breath, but Michael did not respond immediately. Instead, he glanced toward the screen where the $300 million funding slide still glowed, then back to his device. Outside the glass wall, Ryan Lopez noticed the shift. Instantly, his eyes widening slightly as he watched executives exchange looks. Robert Whitfield followed the movement, his confidence slipping further as he sensed the meeting losing its rhythm. The security officer remained still, observing carefully. Meanwhile, Darius Coleman stood exactly where he had been, calm, patient, his posture unchanged, as if this moment had already unfolded in his mind long before it happened. Inside the room, Michael Harrington finally spoke quietly to the presenter, who paused mid-sentence. The silence spread across the table. Executives leaned back slightly. Unsure, Michael tapped his screen once more, then slowly turned his head toward the glass wall, his gaze landing directly on Darius. Recognition flickered across his face, subtle but unmistakable. Ryan felt his chest tighten as he saw it, because that look was not curiosity, it was realization. Robert noticed too, though he did not yet understand. Michael rose from his chair slowly, the movement immediately drawing attention from everyone inside. He stepped away from the table and walked toward the glass door. The room followed him with silent confusion. Outside, Robert straightened instinctively as the door opened. Michael stepped into the hallway, his eyes fixed on Darius. The tension sharpened instantly. Ryan held his breath, and then Michael spoke, his voice low but clear. "Darius," he said, and Robert felt the ground shift beneath his certainty. Darius nodded once, calm as ever. "Good morning, Michael," he replied, and the familiarity in their exchange echoed louder than anything else in the hallway. Michael glanced briefly at Robert, then back at Darius, his expression serious. "We were expecting you inside," he said, and Ryan felt the realization land fully now. Robert blinked, caught between confusion and disbelief. "He was not on the list," Robert said quickly, trying to recover. Michael's gaze shifted toward him, measured and controlled. "He does not need to be on the list," Michael replied, and the quiet authority in his tone settled over the hallway like a sudden drop in temperature. Ryan's pulse quickened. The security officer stepped subtly back, sensing the shift. Robert's voice faltered slightly. "I was just following protocol," he said, but Michael did not respond immediately. Instead, he turned back to Darius. "We cannot proceed without your approval," he added, and the words seemed to freeze the air. Ryan stared at Darius, the final piece locking into place. Darius met Michael's gaze calmly, then spoke softly. "I noticed," and the simplicity of the response carried a quiet power. Because in that moment, everyone understood. The man who had been blocked outside the door was not just another attendee. He was the one holding the decision that controlled the entire $300 million deal. And as the hallway fell silent, Robert Whitfield stood motionless, realizing too late that he had just stopped the most important person in the building from entering the meeting that depended entirely on him. The silence in the hallway deepened as the weight of Michael Harrington's words settled over everyone standing there. Robert Whitfield felt his posture stiffen. The certainty he carried moments ago now replaced by a quiet uncertainty that he could not immediately explain. Ryan Lopez watched carefully, sensing the moment turning from confusion into consequence. Inside the conference room, executives shifted in their seats, whispering quietly as they watched their chief executive officer standing outside with the man they had not even noticed minutes earlier. Michael stepped slightly to the side, gesturing toward the open door. "We should continue inside," he said respectfully, but Darius Coleman did not move immediately. He glanced briefly at Robert, not with anger, not with frustration, just with calm observation, the same calm that had defined his presence from the beginning. Robert cleared his throat, attempting to recover. "I was not aware," he said carefully, his voice lower now. And Darius nodded once, acknowledging the statement without responding. Ryan noticed the subtle shift. The power dynamic had reversed completely. The man who had been asked to step aside now stood at the center of the entire decision. Michael waited, his expression measured. Executives inside leaned forward slightly, watching. The $300 million deal paused in silence. And then Darius finally stepped forward, entering the conference room at a calm, steady pace. The room seemed to adjust around him. Conversation stopped, chairs straightened, laptops lowered. The quiet respect filled the space without a single word being demanded. Darius took a seat near the center of the table, placing his phone beside a printed briefing document. Michael returned to his position at the head of the table, glancing once toward Robert still standing outside, then back to the room. "We will resume," he said. But the energy had changed. Executives now watched Darius carefully, aware that the direction of the meeting depended entirely on him. Robert remained in the hallway, his expression subdued. The security officer stepped quietly back toward his station, sensing the situation had resolved itself. Ryan closed his laptop slowly, still absorbing what had just unfolded. Inside the room, Michael spoke again. "Before we proceed, we will confirm alignment on the funding structure," he said, turning toward Darius. The entire room followed his gaze. Darius reviewed the document calmly, flipping a page with measured precision. The quiet tension returned. But now it was anticipation, not resistance. After a brief pause, Darius looked up, his voice calm and controlled. "There are a few adjustments," he said, and executives leaned forward immediately, ready to follow his lead. The shift was complete. The meeting that had begun without him now revolved entirely around him. And outside the room, Robert Whitfield stood still, realizing that the moment he had tried to control had quietly rewritten itself, not with confrontation, not with raised voices, but with calm authority. And as the discussion resumed inside, the lesson settled into the hallway like a quiet echo. The man who had been told to step aside had just become the one everyone was waiting for. The room settled into a focused silence as Darius Coleman reviewed the final page of the document. The quiet sound of paper shifting seemed louder than usual. Every executive at the table watched him carefully, aware that the outcome of the $300 million partnership rested entirely on his next words. Michael Harrington leaned slightly forward, his expression attentive. While the rest of the team waited with restrained anticipation, Darius closed the document calmly and placed it on the table, his posture relaxed but grounded. Then he looked around the room, making brief eye contact with each executive, not in challenge but in quiet acknowledgement. "The structure is strong," he said evenly, "but the timeline needs to reflect operational reality." His voice was calm, measured, and clear. The room listened closely. He continued, "Adjust Phase 1 rollout to 60 days instead of 30, and align regional expansion with existing infrastructure." Executives nodded quickly, taking notes. The shift from uncertainty to alignment happened almost instantly. Michael nodded once. "That is reasonable," he replied, and Darius leaned back slightly, his expression composed. "If those adjustments are confirmed, we can proceed," he added, and the tension that had filled the room since the beginning of the meeting dissolved quietly. Michael glanced around the table, All in favor, he said, and hands lifted one by one. The agreement formed without hesitation. The $300 million deal moved forward in that moment, and the room seemed to exhale collectively. The partnership was secured. Michael turned back to Darius with a slight nod of appreciation. "Thank you for your guidance," he said, and Darius returned a small nod, calm as ever. Outside the conference room, Robert Whitfield remained near the hallway, his posture subdued, the earlier certainty replaced by quiet reflection. Ryan Lopez walked past him slowly, still absorbing what had unfolded. Inside the room, executives began discussing next steps, the energy now collaborative and focused. Darius gathered his documents calmly, standing at an unhurried pace. As the meeting concluded, Michael walked with him toward the door, their conversation quiet but respectful. When Darius stepped into the hallway again, Robert shifted slightly, his expression careful. "Mr. Coleman," he said, his tone respectful now, "I apologize for the misunderstanding." Darius paused briefly, meeting his gaze with the same calm composure. "You followed what you believed was procedure," he replied, his voice even and controlled. Then he added softly, "But sometimes leadership means looking beyond the list." The words were not harsh, not confrontational, just steady, and they lingered in the hallway longer than expected. Robert nodded slowly, absorbing the lesson. Ryan watched from a distance, understanding that the moment had shifted more than just a meeting. Darius turned and walked down the hallway at a steady pace, his footsteps quiet against the polished floor. The company milestone photos lining the walls reflected the passing moment, and behind him, the room that had once moved forward without him had just secured its future because of him. The hallway returned to its normal rhythm, but the lesson remained clear: the calm presence, the quiet authority, and the reminder that power does not always announce itself. Sometimes it simply waits, steady and patient, until the moment arrives when everyone finally understands.